Here we go, and here we are. Hello, everybody. Hey, Brett and Dave.
Hey there.
Hi.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Kelly Byrnes, and you guys want to introduce yourselves? Brett, you can go first.
Sure. My name is Bret Getzel. Happy to be part of the group here. Came to know Dave and Kelly through our connections at Rockhurst. And I meant to count books. I think this might be 22, if I'm not mistaken. Two more to go, and we'll have lapped this thing for 2 years, which just absolutely blows my mind to think that this thing is going on that. But here we are, and there's a whole long list of books in front of us yet to read. So learning never stops. But I do things in the international strategic supply chain, primarily in protein, work with vendors and suppliers all over the United States, as well as Europe and Canada, and was connecting actually with a supplier this week out of Chile, but always working in the food service space, largely in protein, and really just spend my time solving solutions for national chains, many of which I'm sure our readers and listeners would be familiar with. But that's what I do, and darn glad to be here.
Yay. Thank you, Brett and Dave.
All right, Dave Lingerfelt, educator, and like I think everybody else in the Midwest right now, just trying to dodge the relentless heat. So was happy to spend some time this month reading through the book, and happy to be back doing this again. So looking forward to our chat today, everybody.
Yay. And as Brett said, we all know each other through Rockhurst University. And Brett was in one of my classes. I'm an adjunct professor there, and Dave is a professor. We all have corporate experience, so that's something that we're big proponents of. And we created this. I actually looked it up. I started Kansas City's first leadership book of the month in 2007. I looked it up. There weren't any at the time, and I asked all the chambers and everywhere. There weren't any. So I started one at Starbucks at 119th in Glenwood, and they hosted us, and they served us coffee and everything. That went on for a little while, but resurrected it in 2001. So very excited. But Brett came in and spoke to one of my classes after he graduated with his MBA and hauled in this big box of books. So I said, how about we get together every month and you join my conversation? And then Dave posted all about leadership. So I said, Dave, you need to be on our conversation. So here we are 2 years later. Who'd have thunk it?
Absolutely.
So, yeah. And so in my real job, or my full-time role, I work with Voyage Consulting Group and work on this full-time on leadership development, mostly for the senior leaders, and work with them on their culture and how they nourish that and grow it. And okay, so I'm dying to get the updates. So Brett, do you want to go first with your update?
Sure. I've got 2 this month. We always try to say, hey, walk the talk, right? It's one thing to sit here on the little broadcast and say good things, but can you actually put it into action? And that's one of my themes with the team is, right, speed to close and take action. And I even articulated it to the team. I said, church groups, nonprofits, HOAs, they're notorious for meetings after meetings after meetings, and they just never get anything done. And I said, we got to get things done. That's what business is about. So we started a book club, kind of a personal or team member development initiative here within the company. And the last book that we did was called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So kind of that Kansas City tie. And Chris Voss was a FBI lead negotiator. He actually was on the Kansas City police force, and then obviously went to the FBI in Washington, D.C. We wrote this book called Never Split the Difference, which has kind of become a cornerstone for negotiating. And it's got several techniques. It's not one of those, hey, this was my journey, this is my career kind of thing. I mean, he literally breaks down the process of hostage negotiation and starts really from the premise of life is a constant negotiation. Can be with your spouse, can be buying a car, can be with the guy who cuts your grass. I mean, you go on and on and on. But if you think about it, your life is nothing but one negotiation after another. And so we went through that book 2 chapters at a time and got some tremendous feedback on that, and was able to observe. That's one of the demonstrations of effective learning is observed behavior. And we observed several of the techniques and tactics being implemented by our team within the company. And I'll be hosting a workshop on that later this month. So really kind of the point of all this is saying, hey, not only do we talk about it, not only do we read the book, but we're implementing this thing with our team and really trying to elevate everybody's operational expertise in all these different categories, leadership, and in this particular topic, negotiation. So that's my one update. And then the second thing, I know everybody talks, or I've talked extensively about my daughters. I do that a lot. They're kind of the next generation. So my youngest daughter passed high five the first FAR, what they call the, and I don't know what FAR means, I'm not an accountant, but she passed the first FAR, which is the first section of the CPA. She's now studying for the tax component. So for those of you who have a linkage to that category of testing, it's tough, boy. I'll tell you, she shared that with me. The point I'm making, why I bring this up, is not only now am I talking to her about, the dad things, but boy, we have some really, really good conversations about business and accounting and finance. And as a dad, there is nothing cooler than spending the afternoon talking to your daughter about those things. So to see these, they were young and innocent at one point to evolve to, and I even tell them, I said, the student is very quickly going to become the teacher because she is stripping by me pretty quick. So high five on that. Those are my 2 updates this month, Kel.
Well, one of those days we'll replace you with her or invite her to join us.
There you go. That's
I was
right.
going to replace you with her. We'll get her to join us.
That's right.
Funny you mentioned her because I had breakfast with my dad today, and he was an entrepreneur when I was growing up. He had an office inside our home before it was trendy. And so I learned business from him. And so we had breakfast, and we always talk about business stuff. He's been on my personal advisory board for our company for forever, obviously. And, he'll follow up. 2 weeks ago when we met, you talked about these things. I'm like, I thought it was just breakfast. I didn't know it was our follow-up meeting. So,
well, when Alexis went through her internships, we talked a lot about everybody else who was on her intern team, and she said, "Dad, they all have parents like you." And I said, well, there's a Deloitte hires for a certain MO, a certain background, a certain skill set, and she said, literally, all their parents are just like you. So, yeah, it's interesting to see how a company like Deloitte is able to attract those people. What I'm most excited about is all the people that I've networked that have had experiences or tenures at Deloitte, saying that, hey, there's no company in that category that trains their people any better. So I'm just really excited to see what type of training she gets from Deloitte over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, right on. And I appreciate that they make a lot of their work public so people like me can use it in my work. So,
well, I stumbled on something called Deloitte Performance Management, and we have a performance management in our AOP coming up for the HR department, and literally I'm going to steal everything from Deloitte's performance management because it is best in class.
They put out all their data, their research, same with McKinsey, and yeah, very good. Thanks, Bret. Dave, how was Alaska?
Alaska was wonderful. If you've never got the opportunity, I tell you, it is definitely a place to go. So take that opportunity if you get the chance. Just absolutely beautiful, and kind of regardless of what your beliefs are, you can't look at the landscape there and not think that there was some bigger power involved there, and some of that scenery. It was just absolutely amazing. So a lot of fun. It's been a great summer. While I was on this trip, ironically, at one point I was sitting in the lounge and I had my iPad, and you guys know I'm kind of the digital reader, either on the iPad or through Audible in the car. And this gentleman came up to me and says, "Well, what are you reading?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to figure out what's next." And we got to talking, and he said, "Let me see your book list." So he's looking at all of the digital books that I've got, in my iPad library, and he sees one that we've done in a discussion, Extreme Ownership, and he says, "Oh my gosh, I love Jocko Willink. That was a great book. Have you read his others?" And had this great conversation, and come to find out he was actually a Marine, wasn't a Navy SEAL, but a Marine, and had been deployed and thought very highly of Jocko, and so we had a great conversation. And it was about an hour later, he's still sitting there with me, and my wife shows up with my daughter and it's like, what are you two doing? And I said, well, I just met this guy, I thanked him for his service, a wonderful individual, and we've read some of the same books. And she goes, "I swear you can make friends with anybody." And I said, well, maybe. So great conversation there. And just real quick, the other one, I'm kind of known as the guy that this time of year in the summer, I will not pass up a lemonade stand. I love to see the young entrepreneurs, and we have many in our neighborhood that, will get out in the relentless heat and set up that lemonade stand, just trying to make a buck. And I guess they think with me it's an easy sell, and they can get the sell with me, but I always have the follow-up questions of, how are you investing back into your business? And I typically provide a pretty generous overpayment for that cup of lemonade, and stand there and talk about it and say, well, you wanted $1, I'm giving you 10. What are you going to do? with these additional $9, and how are you going to diversify your company and invest it? And just absolutely love to see these kind of young entrepreneurs getting after it. With my travels this summer, I got a little busy, and for the first time, I don't know how long, actually hired somebody to mow my lawn, and hired a young 13-year-old boy that came and mowed the lawn. And in the dead of heat, he's out there just, working his tail off. So, same thing. I go to pay him and give him a pretty good tip. And I said, well, what's your plans for winter? And he just kind of looked at me, and I said, why don't you take some of this capital and think about buying a snow shovel or a snow blower and like moving into, diversifying your business. So
Yeah.
I love seeing that. I love kids, young teenagers getting out there and figuring out a way. It's always pretty enlightening to me. So a lot of fun, good summer, a lot of time with that sort of stuff.
Awesome. And I think there was a book that was called Everything I Knew About Business I Learned from Running a Lemonade Stand.
Oh, that's hilarious.
That was the thing. Yeah. So I put together a lab to teach scientists about business, to learn the business of their business. And it was based on running a lemonade stand. So they'd have a couple teams, and it made it a little bit of a competition. And they'd have a couple teams, and they wouldn't actually have to literally do the lemonade stand, but within the community of where the building was, pick a location and why they make all the decisions. And it probably would have been good to have them really do the lemonade stand, but the company didn't think it would be a great use of the time of the people to pay them their salaries while they're making $1 a cup or whatever.
Yeah.
But for the competition, it was pretty interesting. And that really just the simplest things.
Yeah.
And that'll get us into our book, which is kind of pretty simple
and I want to comment on that, Dave's deal on the Jocko Willink. That's happened to me so many times.
Yeah.
I thought of you when this was happening. I was like, this happens to Bret all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I mean, it's just incredible how this idea of being an avid reader is something that ties you to people. Kudos and high five, but yeah, it's just amazing how that happens. And I don't know, maybe it's not as amazing as I think it is, because it didn't happen until I started to read like this, but it's
been happening to me for years.
Yeah.
It happened to me yesterday too, when I was getting ready for today, and I was at a Starbucks, and the manager or a person was setting up some stuff, and he asked if he would be disturbing me and opening boxes or something. Like, no. And then he asked what the book was. When I showed him, he said, "Oh, people told me to read that."
The Alan Mulally book, the one that we're doing this month. Oh, I think we lost Kelly. She's froze up there.
Froze up on us there a little bit.
Well, that's all right. We can carry this one for a little bit. So I think next one on our deal here is to introduce our book. I think we can do that. I actually thought when we were ordering this, to be honest with you, Dave, I thought we were ordering American Icon, and I didn't realize that this was kind of the Cliff's Notes version of the book. So I literally went out and ordered There she is. Maybe.
Here we go. Sorry,
there you go.
It was my internet is wonky today, I guess.
Okay.
I'm closing everything.
Well, you didn't miss much. We were about to go into the intros without you, but I'll tee it up and you can jump in. But what I was saying to Dave was
that won't have been recorded. So it was I was sharing about being at the Starbucks.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
That's the part where it got cut off. So it
pick up
because it's on my internet that will be the feed. But anyway, so just connecting with that manager, and we had a great conversation. And I actually took out a card and I wrote last month's book for him to read. I thought that would be a better use of his time than this one. And we talked through this one, but I told him to read Jennifer Nash's book, and he loved that. And we set up, thought that we would continue having conversations about it. And yeah, it was fantastic.
Excellent.
So, yeah,
and what a great conversation that was, Dave. I know you were on Alaska enjoying your time, but cool to have somebody like her on the call. And she was very, very generous with her time, had great insights, things to add. And what a real nice change of pace to what we've normally done. I hope we can do that again in the future. And, no one better to kind of kick off that than her. Dr. Nash was phenomenal.
Yeah.
That's great.
I didn't think of it soon enough, but I looked for Alan Mulally on social, and I didn't find him the other day. So I did invite Adam Witty the co-author, but I think I said late last night, so I didn't hear from him yet. But certainly we will start doing that in the future, especially when we really like the book. But let's get into the book and the purpose of these conversations. We talked about how we all know each other and why we came together to do these. But the whole intention of these conversations is to help leaders who want to invest in themselves today so they're better leaders tomorrow. And the world changes all the time. Employees change, all the stakeholders change. So leadership has to continue evolving. And so we want to be part of your journey and help with that evolution. And we're reading these books all the time. We read way more than we have time to talk about in our once a month conversation. We could do these every week. Okay, just kidding.
Probably could, actually.
Yeah, we really could.
Yeah.
And that's why we do them live, because we don't edit it. So this is just going to be out there live. But we want to be part of that journey. And so we talk about the books in a way that we're not trying to regurgitate the book, but try to give nuances of it that help you decide if you're going to read it and apply it to what you do and if it's going to be useful for you. There is a handout this month, so you can go to the website. I will call that up here for you and grab that if you would like. If I can call it up here. My touch screen will hopefully work. That's not working either. Well, it's on voyagecg.com /leadership books. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, you can see the leadership book link there. Okay, this should be coming up in a second. But so you can grab the handout if you would like. Okay, so this one is Relentless Implementation, this little tiny book, Relentless Implementation, 90 pages, I think it was. 90 something. The subtitle, Creating Clarity, Alignment, and a Working Together Operating System to Maximize Your Business Performance. And it's by Alan Mulally, who was the CEO and the change turnaround specialist at Forbes, at Ford, and Adam Witty. And so let me tell you about them. So Alan Mulally probably needs no introduction, so I'm not going to cover all the basics, but I do want to let you know that he grew up near us in Lawrence, Kansas. Mm-hmm. So that's where his mom was from, and his parents met at a USO dance and got married just within a few weeks after that dance. And he grew up in a household where, kind of like Bret, where your daughter is growing up, and probably her new colleagues, where his parents talked to him and his sister. I think he had 3 sisters. His parents talked to him about personal things and development and stuff. So he grew and developed as a person in addition to getting an education. And then every day his mom and dad would say stuff to him as they were leaving. And one of the most important was about the purpose of life. What's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of everything? And the kids would have to answer. And the purpose of life, they would say, the purpose of life is to love and be loved in that order. Love and be loved in that order. And so this book doesn't go into those kind of things, but when you add all of that underlying of who he is to the relentless implementation, I think that's how you can carry it off. But he brought that part of who he is to his education. So he became an engineer at Kansas University. University of Kansas, got his undergrad and master's there in aeronautical and astronautical engineering. And then he went to MIT for the School of Management there. And started his career at Boeing, and then went through different program management roles and moved up the ranks in management at Boeing. And interesting enough, career development, career planning, he was passed over for the lead job in Boeing twice. And so from there, then he was chosen to be the leader of Ford. I keep saying Forbes, Ford Motor Company. And that it's part of just interesting when you're planning your career. You know, he's very well known now, and he was kind of then too when he was passed over. I certainly knew about him. A lot of people did at the time, but he had done a lot at Boeing, so we don't have time to go into all of that. But he that's just part of a journey. And at Ford, though, when he became president of Ford, and he is credited with turning it around and making hard decisions and making it through that recession in the 2009, 2010 10 era of being the only one of the big automotive manufacturers in the U.S. that didn't take the loan from the government. They and came out of it on the other side. So it was a big questioned decision at the time. It was a big, huge thing. And Ford at the time was known for having silos. It was bad leadership, bad bureaucracy, all kinds of things. So it was more than just financial issues that they had there. And that's the part that always intrigued me, was the other stuff. And his leadership turned it around, but he had to change the culture too, and not just dealing with the numbers or the financials. And last month's author, Jennifer Nash, worked at Ford and worked with him. And that's how this book came to our attention and really made it on our radar. So the co-author on here, it's listed as Alan Mulally and Adam Witty. Adam Witty is the CEO of Forbes Books, who is the publisher of this book. And Adam Witty is, I think, the main author of it. And then it sounds like that's like he's really the writer of it. And he talks about how he was going to write this book about what he learned from what Alan Mulally had accomplished at Ford. And so then Alan said, well, let's do this together. And so that's kind of how the book came to be. And so let's go into it. Okay, general thoughts at first. General. Dave, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can do that. It was definitely a very quick read, so I think it's one of those that even if we share with you, it wasn't maybe high on our list. You're not out a great deal of time, as I share with everybody. I typically do stuff via Audible, so I had one day where I had a particularly high amount of driving across town and got through the book in one day. So it's a very, very quick read. I will say it's definitely not the book that is probably for everybody. Just kind of on the surface, what he has proposed clearly works. He had excellent success with it. It's a little meeting heavy. What he proposes is a significant amount of meetings. I think we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think, like any book, I've yet to read a book where I 100% agree with everything that's in it. Mm-hmm. So I don't, but I also don't disagree with everything that's in there as well. So I'm excited to kind of jump into that. For me, kind of being coming up in the automotive industry is kind of my first career-ish, I guess you will. Alan Mulally was the first one to kind of step back into Ford and lead Ford after an actual Ford turned it back over. So, yeah. I'll talk more about that later, but I mean, that says a lot about his talent and ability that the Ford family felt comfortable enough turning the company over to someone that didn't have the last name of Ford after some of the struggles they had been through. So he's led an incredibly impressive career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a big deal. Thanks for reminding me. Brett, general thoughts?
Yeah, I've commented here when the Wi-Fi was down, but when I ordered this book, to be honest with you, I thought I was ordering American Icon. And I think when you and I started exchanging things, that's what I was suggesting. And I got the book in the mail, and it came in this really, really thin envelope. And I thought, I didn't order that. What is this? And I opened it up, and sure enough, I had. So I've actually ordered American Icon. I've got that coming, and I'll have to put that into my reading list because I am curious about going through that book as well. So as I was reflecting on the book, and then my mind kept drifting to the business case studies that we do in business school, and then some of the authors that we've covered. And inevitably, if you think about the businesses, right? And I was thinking of Hubert Gillet that did Best Buy, Indra Nooyi that did Pepsi. Although the company is kind of the vehicle that they talk about, and obviously they had some success, those companies and their success or not are really a function of those leaders. And if you think of Ford, right, the discussion now is about Alan Mulally, but he just happened to be a phenomenal leader at Ford. So my point in the case studies in business school are always about the company. And it would be interesting if you really had time in business school to do a deep dive in who the leaders of those companies were at the time, because it would reframe kind of that conversation. So as far as the book in general, I had actually just read a year ago, Traction by Gino Wickham, which is an operating system really kind of designed for entrepreneurs. And as I started to think about this book and where companies are in their maturation process, there are companies out there that are founder-led, entrepreneurial, early stage, seed stage companies that, hey, their whole agenda, their whole objective is just to survive the day, either to deliver a software solution or deliver a product, box something up and get it to FedEx, whatever the case may be. And for those companies that are in that flight or fight or that thrive, that survival mode, I could see where a book like this would put some structure and some frame around their business. So because I started to think about, well, where would somebody learn this if they didn't come from a Fortune 500 company? Probably from a book, or they would maybe go to a mentor. Several of the small business organizations in the metro areas have former CEOs that come alongside early stage companies and offer mentorship. In my case, I worked for a Fortune 500 company and saw this kind of demonstrated time and time again. The part I like about the book rather, is understanding the why. Hey, do this, right? Budget at this time of the year, or let's have this meeting, or this meeting leads to that meeting. Well, I think a book like this, or Traction, or American Icon, helps maybe that junior manager or that mid-level manager understand why all these things are taking place. I think we naturally aspire, particularly when we're early in our career, that CEO, he's a god, right? He's got all the answers. He knows everything. Is there anything this man or woman doesn't know? Well, they've been trained, they've been taught, they've been mentored, they've been coached, and all they're doing is basically putting 30 or 40 years of experience into action. I mean, they weren't born that way. They came through it through good coaching, good mentoring, good education.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, I thought the same about the usage of it, and I kind of took for granted. Doesn't everybody know this already? But their wording of the working together operating system reminded me of the entrepreneur operating system. EOS that's a popular system out there. So then, and they did promote at the end of the book a software program for beginning or end. I did look on the website to see about ordering that, and or I didn't look for that tool, but the BPR360.com isn't alive anymore. I don't know if you guys look for that.
I tried to order it in the website, what did it say? Not valid or something.
Yeah.
But it's not around.
That didn't go. So I did take the links that were in the back that of this that talked about, I think they're in the back, that gave further reading somewhere in here, in the back or the front somewhere. They provided a list of further reading. So I put some of my favorites that I've read over the years on the handout for people. So you can grab that. And I also included the case. There is a case study on the turnaround, and it's one I've used in one of my MBA classes. And it's from Northwestern, but I get it from Harvard. And so I included that link. But I couldn't find the direct link at Northwestern. So anyway, it's there for people if you want to have that, and the links are active for you. So those are my general thoughts too. And then I looked up, after Dave and I talked the other day in our pregame, the comments and the ratings. The book didn't have very many ratings and reviews. And in the world of an author, people know that you really do want to get a lot of reviews, and it didn't have very many. And the average was 3.5 out of 5. So not the greatest received of all of the books, but I think people might have dismissed it because a lot of the comments, or the ones that had comments, were about how basic it is and how small, minimal it is. But I think that where this could be useful is, Bret, like you said, for somebody that has never done it before, or really, I also thought if it's old hat to you and you want a refresher, or want to just, I kind of remembered a few things after reading it, and I thought, okay, I could fine tune some of this stuff. So I think
I read an article about maybe 3 months ago, and it was called CRO. I had no idea what a CRO was, and as I read the article, it was the Chief Repeating Officer. And the genesis. Have you read that? Yeah, and the genesis
Revenue Officer.
No, Chief Repeating Officer, and what the genesis of it was is, if you're the CEO and every time you walk into a staff meeting on Monday, you have a different theme or a different anthem, right? You're not very consistent. And what they tried to promote in the article was that latch on to the 4 or 5 things that you think are critical to the success of the business and repeat those. Be consistent. And that's kind of where I was going with this, is to say, hey, you know what, this is kind of a playbook that this is how we're going to do things. I made a comment to the team the other day that, and I always think of I love the sports analogies, college basketball, they always talk at the beginning of the season, the coach hasn't put in his full playbook yet. And then the team goes to the NCAAs in March, and now the team's expected to run every play that the coach has, and it's a different team than where they started. It's the same thing when you come into an organization, right? You have to instill your EOS, whether it's your personal EOS, whether it's the BRP, I think he calls it business review process, whatever. But once you get your play in, then all you can do is you hold your team to a standard of excellence, and they run the same play again and again and again and again. So this idea that you have to have, I call it the latest pixie dust every month. Hey, what's the new magic potion that's going to take us to the finish line? Do the simple things well, and you'll be successful.
Right. I have that same conversation with leaders all the time about culture, and I'm not a fan of doing like a big kickoff to we're going to redo our culture and let's have a big kickoff about it. Like, no, just start doing the things, and then it'll come around and they'll notice what you do more than what you talk about.
Well, I think you condition your team, right, to know that if you go into a meeting and you whatever theme you want to say, and next week you come in and they either have or haven't performed, or they haven't delivered the task, whatever the case may be, and you're on to the next thing, and you don't follow up on what you talked about last month, you condition your team to know, what, he'll forget about it by next month. Don't worry about it. There's no follow through and no accountability. Your team gets conditioned to that, and it's not a good culture to have.
Nope, it is not.
And I think the other part to that is to say, as a leader, and it's particularly important to leaders, the gravity of what you say is much larger than what you realize. And the point I make in that is use your words sparingly and use them with purpose, be deliberate, right? And stay with that. So I think the best leaders probably say less, but by saying less, they actually say more.
That's really wise advice.
Yeah. And it's difficult, right? We all want to be on the stage. We all want to be in front of the bright lights. We all want all eyes on us, and we want to have the microphone. And it's very difficult, I think, for leaders to hand the microphone to somebody else and step back and say, you guys probably are old enough, but some of our listeners not, right? When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And, it's that, right? Say less, but by saying less, you'll probably say more.
Yeah.
That's really good. So on the principles, anything on any of those specifically that got your attention?
Yeah, I know. There's several of them that really jumped out. Obviously, I like the fact about people first, but I think I would be remiss as a professor of data science if I didn't call out the facts and data principle that he talked about. And I think for me, I've been a big fan of the automotive industry for a long time, and I think it's kind of important to note, like I mentioned in the kickoff, that he was the first that wasn't of the last name of Ford to kind of step into the leadership helm. But if you back up a little bit, when Bill Clay Ford stepped back in to take the company over when Jack Nasser was running the company at the height of their downfall, I actually had a family member that was working for Ford at the time. And I was an undergrad, and at the time I happened to be taking a course in operations management. And Ford was having all of these troubles. If you remember, this was back when they were having the issues with the Ford Explorers, and the tires were exploding, and these people were going, "Gosh, is it even safe to drive this thing down the road?" And Jack Nasser, the CEO at the time, is getting on TV and literally taking out ad spots saying, at Ford, quality is job one, and we take this very seriously. And family member that worked for Ford, he comes home with this, insulated mug that says Ford, quality job one. And I said, "Oh boy," I said, "Well, what are they doing to actually put quality first?" And he looked at me, he goes, "I really don't know." He said, but and he worked on the assembly line. So, that you're, frontline worker at its, most basic definition. But he goes, "I really don't know, but they did tell us today that they were speeding up the assembly line to increase output. And we were making 81 cars an hour. Now we're making 83 cars an hour." And as a guy, a young business student that had just come through, an operations management class, my head was about to explode, right? I said, "You can't do that. You can't increase quality and increase throughput at the same time." So again, that's what, kind of Alan Mulally had to step into and go fix. So, it truly is looking at the data. And, I would, as I'm, thinking about that, I go back to, everybody that studies operations has to study Deming, right? And, 14 principles. And, one of his famous sayings was, in God we trust, all others bring data. So
Yes.
That was one that really jumped out at me. So
good. Yeah. Awesome. Bret, what about you? Any of them jump out at you, good or bad?
Well, I'm sitting here laughing because there's 11 facts, right? I counted them, and I picked the same two that David. So I really did. But the people first thing, and we probably don't put enough weight on this, but having been in business as long as I have, the ability to hire well, the ability to create a team is such a rare art. And I just don't think that people appreciate the difficulty and the challenge. And I've seen it go both ways, right? Where CEOs make the home run hire and they bring in a guy who's just a change agent, guy or gal, bring in a change agent that just really has a very positive impact on the organization. And I've seen it go the other way. And I'm not talking about frontline leaders. I'm talking people that are C-suite leaders where the hire was a complete miss. Yeah. And you say, how can that possibly happen? Trust me, I've seen it. I mean, I've lived it. And in my industry, I mean, not just in companies that I'm working with, but companies that, I work that are working in the industry where a CEO, I got nothing to gain or lose, but I think that they had a CEO here recently 2 years ago at Tyson. The guy wasn't there a year. And when they plugged him in, everybody that I talked to in the industry said, what are they thinking? And then a year later, the guy was gone. Same thing that happened at Smithfield, another big, and these are people in the meat business. So if you know protein and that, you're familiar with these names. But Smithfield's a big retail brand. And literally they plugged a guy in and was a square peg in a round hole. A year later, the guy was gone. And these are big boards, big executives that are making big hires, and they totally miss on these people. And you just kind of step back and scratch your head and just say, were they going for the white whale that's never going to work, or did they see something that we in the public side did? But anyway, people first was the first thing, and then I made a second bullet point as I was preparing my notes. And we did interviewing, and I love that book because we've referenced it so many times since. But she literally followed. The guy's name was Gerhard, I think was who he was, from Motorola to another company out east. But literally she followed him, and she wasn't following the job, she was following the boss. And we've all seen this where people don't work for a company, they work for a leader, they work for a boss. The point I make with all of this is, as a leader, right, one of your jobs is to create a climate. That the thing that I always said when I interviewed folks, and I still do this even today, and think of most interviews, they're so one-sided where the interviewer is interviewing the candidate as if that's the only thing that matters. And I used to really kind of twist my interviews around, and I would probably spend half of my time making sure that we as a company were a good fit for the candidate, more so or equal to whether that candidate was a good fit for the company. And particularly given how competitive the job category is, particularly for good quality talent, people have a choice, right? They don't have to work for your company. They don't have to work for you. And I think people are inherently, in today's environment, maybe not as loyal as they once were, and they're not as averse to taking another opportunity, or maybe taking a chance, or moving. So anyway, a lot to be said in that one category of people, and I could talk a long time about it. I'm pretty passionate about it, but there's just so much there. The other thing was facts and data, and again, amazing that I picked the same thing that Dave did. But again, when you're building a company, that founder-led company, data is probably not real important. You probably got bigger things to worry about, just getting the product out the door, or getting the solution built and launched. But once you aspire to, hey, you know what, we're at least foundationally solid, the next thing that comes is data. And data is that, I call it the financial scorecard that tells you the health and wellness of the company, and obviously points out the opportunities for improvement. So I'm big on those two. Not to say that the other ones aren't equally as important, but I would definitely spend that. If there was a third one, is performance goals, and I didn't spend a lot of time preparing on that one, but as I was looking through the list, people, data, and then clear performance goals. We've obviously got to have a plan, right? We can't drive across the country if we don't know where we're going.
Well, we'll get to that one in a minute too, with the next part of our conversation. But with the data, if you pay attention, people will tell you what they buy. So like you need market data. So you pay attention, like you need data. So entrepreneurs will sometimes just stay so focused on, making their widget or do, whatever it is, and then nobody's buying that.
Yeah.
Make something else,
Yes.
do something different. There's data that tells you something needs to be different there about the product or your approach to the market or something.
Yep.
So yeah, data is important. But the one that I picked was the one about your attitude. And it says your outlook informs your results. And Brett, when you said about the leaders can underestimate the impact their words have, and the same is true about their demeanor, their emotional state or their capacity, all of those things, the attitude. And I don't often see that brought up in a strategic planning conversation, or in a book about that kind of a thing, or operation mechanisms. It never talks about attitude. So I really appreciated that one being on the list as, and I've seen it in my own work. And if everybody's talking about the recession and how horrible it's going to be, that is, I think I've shared this in here before, but in the 2009 recession, I had a company back then, and everyone's talking about how horrible everything is. And well, I paid attention, and I knew the companies had money, so I just got them to switch the line item in their budget and hire me to do things because I paid attention, but if I was just down in the dumps like everybody else, then you could be miserable like everybody else, or figure stuff out and go forward, but there's a way. So your outlook informs your results. Okay, so I want to skip ahead to the operating. So the book is about the working together operating system. So I think that's what they were, this Adam Witty was probably trying to create, kind of like EOS, this operating system. And basically they recommend 4 meetings a week. So 2 are about the company. And so it's the business plan review, BPR, for the company. And that is 30 minutes to 90 minutes, depending on the size of your company, and just looking at your business plan. And then anything that comes out of that meeting that's not on target, you're looking at the strategies and the tactics, are you doing what you said you're going to do and how it's going. Anything that's not hitting the mark, you meet again the guy's here to mow our lawn. So now that's going to be disruptive to the recording. I apologize if you could hear that now. So the second part is the special attention meeting, SAM. So BPR and then SAM meetings. And those are 2 hours a week. And then the second layer of that is for each department would have one. And so each department or functional area of a company would have a business plan review for their area. And then anything that comes up that's missing the mark, you don't address that in the BPR, you address that in the SAM. And then the SAM meetings also focus on, strategy, products, process improvement, or people. So there's one topic a week. There was one of those topics each one. So each of those get 30 minutes at the SAM. So that's the basic structure. So at first I thought, oh my God, this is so many meetings. That just turned me off. And then I did the math. I'm like, wait a minute, how much time is that in the meetings? It's not really all that much. I did the math. How much time was that? 6 hours, I think. And so leaders are spending more than that in meetings. Yeah. They're probably spending more than that in those meetings, having a bunch of meetings about the same stuff. So then I thought, that's kind of an interesting approach. I would probably give that a try. So I kind of liked that idea, but I was concerned about the discipline of, would people stick with the time? Because they want you to have it at the same time every week. And once the leader doesn't come, or you cancel it for one thing, then you don't have the credibility. So you really have to stick with it. That's where the relentless comes in. Yep. That's the relentless part of this whole thing, is having those meetings at the same time and having the same agenda, and they tell you what all of that is. So thoughts on all of that, the concept of it?
Yeah, that's kind of where my head went, Kelly, was it seemed a little meeting heavy to me. And I'm just kind of my personal principle. I'm not a big fan of recurring meetings, just for the sake of a recurring meeting. I realize we have to have these times where we have to check in on the regular, but I'm also a big proponent of, okay, put the recurring meeting on the calendar, but 48 hours before that meeting, if we have nothing of value to share or discuss, let's be respectful of everyone's time and cancel that meeting. we've all been there where those recurring meetings, I had one just a few weeks ago where, literally 2 hours before the meeting, I get this agenda that comes out, and you can tell it's one of those, oh, wait a minute, I forgot we have this meeting. I'm going to throw these items on there. And actually, take a page out of Brett's book, with it, talking about, my daughter, like he does with his girls is, my daughter got home from school one day this week and texted me, "Hey Dad, I'm home." And I said, "Sounds great. How was your day?" She said, it was great. And I said, "Well, I'm sitting here in a boring meeting." And my daughter's immediate response was, could this have been done in email? And at 13 years old, my 13-year-old is asking, could this meeting have been an email? And I said, yes, it could have. So I think we have to be real careful with these type of meetings. Do we truly need to collaborate, or do I just need to convey information to the group? If I just need to convey information, let's send an email. If I truly need to meet and collaborate, let's be sure we make it collaborative. But Kelly, to your point, the first time that leader doesn't show up to that meeting and says, "I've got more important things to do, you guys drive this forward," you've lost your group.
Yeah. And then the other thing is they really emphasize in the business plan review not to solve things there.
Right.
And so I do think having the update and talking about what's changing, so then you can focus on moving forward. So in some of my career roles, I've been responsible for the strategic planning process. And it was kind of hard to convince them, don't spend the time, you have 30 minutes up there, and people tend to do a review of the last quarter. Like, no, that just send that in the email or the packet ahead of time. But you don't need to probably talk about all of that. And I was also a little worried about when you do all of these things together, what do you think is the impact of that on the leader's authority? Does that diminish their authority of they're not really making decisions, they're getting everybody's input. So what's their leadership aspect of that? They just need to be a good facilitator and able to set up a meeting, or what?
I'll chime in on that one. So I was new to the business, and I'm notorious for taking notes. I mean, if there was such a thing as dictation, I don't know how to do shorthand, I would. And I was 2-3 meetings in, and I went back to my notes and brought up in the recurring meeting, no disrespect to Dave, well, hey, 3 weeks ago you said this and that you would do this. And I don't know what the VP said, I don't recall that. But as we progress in this pattern, right, there was a positive conflict, a healthy conflict between 2 VPs. And one said to the other, "I'm not going to say anything because he's going to write it down." And they knew, they became conditioned to understand that if they made a commitment of, I will do this by this time and this will be the outcome, that I was going to write it down and it was going to come up again and it was going to stay on my action item list until we had a satisfactory solve. So my point in saying that is that, in my opinion, is the ultimate in terms of accountability and discipline and structure and focus. And I believe that's where leadership plays a role in these meetings. You get 2 talented and spirited VPs in a conversation, and it's a game of one-upmanship between one versus the other. I'm just sitting back, letting the thing unfold and writing down the notes and figure out where this thing's going to end and if there's going to be a positive outcome and when it's going to happen by. And
Love it.
Like I said, I refer back to that each week until we've closed it out. So, and I think you create a culture, you create a climate of, 1, expectation, and 2, of accountability.
Yeah. And that's exactly right with accountability. Because like you said before, if you don't go back and look at those notes and look at the action items, even ending the meeting with a list of action items, I think is good. Start the next meeting with those. And
I don't know if this is true, and I don't know if you guys will agree with this, but I've always said, if I walk out of a meeting, any meeting, and there's no action item, whether it's mine or somebody else's, really all we've done is, as I think Dave even said this, all we've done is report the news. And I can read, I can do a pre-read, I can read an email, I can read a KPI sheet, I can read a dashboard. If I don't come out of a meeting, if somebody doesn't come out of that meeting with an action item, it wasn't a productive and healthy meeting.
Like with what's next, like after all of this.
As I was reading the meeting thing, I knew there were quotes out there, and God love Google, right? And Mark Cuban's on record, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. I mean, Bezos thing is the 2 pizza meeting, right? If there's more people in a meeting than 2 pizzas, it's too many people. And Musk thing is meetings are where people go when they don't actually do any work, is what his comment was. And then I think what did Cuban say here? He said, I don't remember what I tried to find his quote, but Cuban had a quote on that as well. But my point is, you got 3 really, really successful entrepreneurial IT executives who are kind of anti-meeting, or I think Elon Musk has said, go, feel free to step out of the meeting when you know you're not contributing any value. I mean, basically gives you the green light to check out of the meeting. And now it'd be interesting to see what somebody like Mulally would say about that. And that they're probably in some level of conflict.
I think he says that every leader on the senior team has to go to all of those 4 meetings. And
right.
So not to every department meeting, but to their own department meeting. But
right.
Yeah. But if the leader can't be there, they should still have the meeting that week.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then accountability was the other thing. So I think that sometimes companies can get in a bit of a quandary because you don't want to shame somebody. And they talk about that. If your forecast is off, a lot of things can cause that. Sure. So that I think that there's some room for grace. But if it's off all the time, maybe you're not that great at forecasting what's going on in your marketplace. And
there's a ton of value for KPIs and scorecards and dashboards and I'm not quite the data wonk that Dave is, but I'm a fan of data and scorecards, and I think that's what we talk about, is to say, hey, and I call it 3 green, kind of the reference to the pilot analogy in your landing gear down. If you're 3 green, I don't want to talk about it, right? You gave me a plan. Whatever your behavior of you and your team is, you're obviously delivering the metric. Let's talk about the 2 or 3 that are yellow or red and what the strategy is. And this is my illustration, and everybody that's on the call will love this, right? If I'm flying straight north, 360 is 0, whatever you want, and I'm off by 1 degree the first week, it's about, I don't know if you can see my hands, it's about this far. But if I don't correct that, and every week that goes on, I get that much further away from the plan. I'd much rather correct it when it's down here and try to correct it up here. And that's the illustration that I use with the team as well. Correct it right here, and it's a little adjustment. You correct it out here, and you've almost got a correction that can't be made anymore, and you're throwing the plan or the budget out the window. So let's catch those things quick, and let's get them fixed.
Agreed.
And Dave, we talked about that in the pregame the other day, about having a culture where people can bring that up, where people can bring up things that are wrong and mistake. Didn't we? Was that in our meeting that we talked about that, or was that a different meeting? Okay.
Yeah, we did. We talked about that. I'm kind of again reminded. I read something from Colin Powell years ago, and one of his cornerstones of leadership was, when people stop bringing problems to you, that's when you stop becoming their leader. And Mulally talked about that they're coming to you because they need your help to problem solve. And if you're aggressive and kind of shoot them down or demean them a little bit, then they're just going to internalize that and stop bringing it to you. And then we've got bigger problems, like what Brett's talking about, where I keep it quiet, and then 6 months later, we've got a really big problem.
Yeah.
I read that in the book, and it's always the, hey, don't bring me a problem unless you bring me a solution. And he basically rebuts that in spades. So I thought that was very big. And that's the first time I've ever seen that print. I agree.
And we only have a little bit of time left. So in the time we have left, let's talk about leadership. And they get into it a little bit in the book. And I think not enough, because you do have to have, be a strong leader to be this disciplined, to use this process, and then also to approach it with the heart that will really get the buy-in. And they don't talk about that in this book at all. And even in corporate, but companies of any size, the leaders would benefit from coming at it with that kind of approach. So let's see, what did they talk about leadership, leaders not being arrogant, that kind of thing. But sometimes the forecasts are missed or targets are missed. It's not always because the leaders are arrogant. That was the only thing they talked about. But they're missed for lots of reasons. Sure. And so I think being aware of that is a good thing. But Brett, you had the idea to talk about curiosity, and we only have a little bit of time left, but I think that mindset is such an important thing. So curiosity was one of the things that we talked about a little bit in the pregame.
Yeah, it was a question. I was talking to some people in the company, and we were talking about how do you instill, or can you instill, can you taught, can it be learned, this idea of being a curious leader, having a curious mindset. And I know Kelly works extensively in culture and talks about that. And I thought, what, who better to go to for a conversation about whether or not that's possible? Are you born with that? Is it just something that's innate in who you are? And as I thought about it even further, I thought, as you're putting together your team, you could probably develop interview questions around, hey, are you the right type of a leader? Do you have that curious mindset? And then Kelly gave me a hard time because I thought I tagged a really clever term, curious culture. She said, no, you're not the first one to say that. So, I don't know where you go with that, Kelly, but I'm dying to hear what you have to say, because it's definitely something that's on my radar and something that I'm thinking about.
I think a great question to ask people, I just thought of this in interviewing, is what are you curious about?
Right.
Because everybody's curious about something, but if
you'd hope, right?
Yeah, but if they don't, one would think, but if they don't mention anything at all related to anything has to do with anything that your people can relate to it, and maybe they're not curious about what you do in the work. It could be stuff outside of work, but if they're not curious about anything at all that relates to anything that your people are interested in.
Yeah, I was with some data people this week, and we got talking about data and all that, and data always boils down to what's the question. And
yeah,
I can't tell you how many people struggle with working with data and analyzing data and insights. It's pretty simple. What's the question?
Right.
And more than likely, can we find data that answers the question? What's the question? And that's and that ends with a question mark, right? What's the question? Ends with a question mark. So, and that all ties back to being curious. So I don't know. Let's think about it, through the month, guys, and we can maybe do some Googling or stuff. But and maybe some people on that are listening have some thoughts on this. But it's this idea about how do you create a curious mindset in your leadership team.
I love it. And if you do have questions or comments, we do have time. You can post them, and I have my phone actually, so I can see the comments now. So if you're watching live, you can post questions, and we can take them for a minute. The other thing related to leadership is the rewards. One wording that bothered me in the book, how Dave, you brought up, you don't always agree with everything or disagree with everything, but he said, I think systematically reward when the numbers are hit or whatever. And I thought, well, how about genuinely also? You just congratulate people too. And, you have those kind of conversations. But then handling it when targets are missed, and having a process and, I've known about companies and worked at places where people could miss and miss and miss, and there's no accountability because everybody had input to it. So the leaders were never held accountable.
Right. And we go back to the Jocko Willink example. I don't know if you remember this, but when you win, it's the team. When you lose, it's the leader.
It's you.
And I think that's a really, really powerful mindset that puts the accountability, and you think about it, right? I mean, if the football team wins, it's generally the quarterback and the coach. And if they lose, you know what? It's the quarterback and the coach.
Yep.
It's a team. And you'll even hear coaches say, right, we won because of a team effort. And
right.
If they lost,
right. Well, and in football, at the end of the season, they might fire that coach, or not even at the end of the season.
Right.
Well, that's ultimate accountability.
In business, though, the people making the decision are the ones in that room. They're not firing those people unless it's the board making that, but the board isn't always aware of what's going on either.
Right.
So those people, so that might be them that are, making the wrong forecast continuously, but they're not the ones laid off. It's the ones, budgets are missed again. So it's not them, it's their teams that are let go. So,
right.
Yeah. So in the end, do you think this process, or even fine tuning the process, is relevant for any kind of organization, any size?
I think it has its place. I mean, every organization, big or small, needs to have some type of a framework, whether you call it EOS or whatever you want to call it. But my thought would be is that if you've got a highly evolved company, highly evolved business organization, they're finding a way to get things done. They're finding a way to achieve their objectives. Now, do you tinker with that? Can you always be more efficient? Can you always be better? Probably. And I think whether you incorporate parts of this, all of it, some of it, none of it, you have to have that idea of saying, hey, can we be better than we are? And There's always room for improvement. So I don't think I ever read any of these books and say, you know what, I'm going to incorporate everything from the first page to the last. I'm going to take the parts that apply to me, and I'll take them for a test drive. And if they work, you know what, they stick, we keep them around.
Yeah. Dave, thoughts from you?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I don't think this is a one size fits all. I think for some organizations, yes. I worry with like the smaller organizations, startups. This is probably a little heavy. So yeah, not for everybody. But again, this is a quick read. So if you're at all curious, it's worth picking up.
Yeah, I think there's good principles in there throughout for a quick read, fine tune, and create that process for your company in some way. Having a strategic plan and reviewing it on a regular basis, and using that for accountability. I think that's key. And then I recommend paying attention to Alan Mulally and other aspects of what he talks about with regard to leadership. That's what the handout was for. And we are at the top of the hour. Our time went fast. And for the littlest book, we got into the book faster than we do sometimes, and we still talked about it the whole time. So we'll post next month's book coming up soon, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon. So thank you both. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
You're welcome.
Everybody.